Hello, and welcome to another Read With Me session. I'm yours truly, Isabel Bedell, and I'm here to read with you an amazing part 2 of Good to Great. We are on chapter 3, okay? Verse 2, and then what? And then we are on part 2 where we're talking about being ruthless. Oh, rigorous, not ruthless. And I'm excited about this because this is definitely a topic that it's wildly spread on social media and on just culture about being ruthless. So I'm curious to know what he's talking about. Okay. The good to great companies probably sound like tough places to work, and they are. If you don't have what it takes, you probably won't last long. But they're not ruthless cultures. They're rigorous cultures. And the distinction is crucial. To be ruthless means hacking and cutting, especially in difficult times, or wantonly firing people without any thoughtful consideration. To be rigorous means consistently applying exacting standards at all times and at all levels, especially in upper management. To be rigorous, not ruthless, means that the best people need not worry about their positions and can concentrate fully on their work. Good one. In 1986, Wells Fargo acquired Crocker Bank and planned to shed gobs of excess cost in consolidation. There's nothing unusual about that. Every banker merger in the era of deregulation aimed to cut excess costs out of a bloated and protected industry. However, what was unusual about the Wells Crocker consolidation is the way Wells integrated management, or to be more accurate, the way it didn't even integrate most Crocker's management into the Wells culture. The Wells Fargo team concluded right up front that the vast majority of the Crocker managers would be the wrong people on the bus. Crocker people had long steeped in the traditions of perks of old-style banker culture, complete with marbled executive dining rooms and in its own chef and $500,000 worth of china. Quite a contrast to the Spartan culture at Wells Fargo. Well, where management ate food prepared by a college dormitory food service, Wells Fargo made it very clear to the Crocker managers, listen here, look, this is not a merger of equals, it's an acquisition. We bought your branches and your customers. We didn't acquire you. Lord! That is so cold. Wells Fargo terminated most of Crocker's management team, 1,600 of them. They were gone on day one. Oh, including nearly all the top executives. Geez, that's cold. A critic might say, that's just the Wells people protecting their own. But consider the following fact. Wells Fargo also sent some of its own managers packing in some of the cases where Crocker managers were judged as better qualified. When it came to management, the Wells Fargo standards were ferocious and consistent. Like a professional sports team, only the best made the annual cut. Ooh. Wow. Regardless of the position or tenure. Stunned. Summed up, one Wells Fargo executive said this: the only way to deliver to the people who are achieving is not to burden them with the people who are not achieving. On the surface, this looks ruthless, but the evidence suggests that the average Crocker manager was just not the same caliber as the average Wells Fargo manager and would have failed in the Wells Fargo performance culture. And if they weren't going to make it on the bus in the long term, why let them suffer in the short term? One senior Wells Fargo executive told us, we all agreed this was an acquisition, not a merger, and there's no sense beating around the bush, not being straightforward with people. We decided it would be the best to simply do it and on day one. We planned our efforts so that we could say right up front, sorry, we don't see a role for you, or yes, we do see a role. You have a job, so stop worrying about it. We weren't going to be subject to our culture to a death by 1,000 cuts. Wow. That's a different type of mind shift. To let people languish in uncertainty for months or years, stealing precious time into their lives that they could use to move on to something else when in the end, they aren't going to make it anyway. That would be ruthless. Ah, dang, coming in hot with all these. To deal with it right up front and let people get on their lives is rigorous. Not that the Crocker acquisition is easy to swallow. It never is pleasant to see thousands of people lose their jobs, but the era of bank deregulation saw hundreds of thousands of lost jobs. Given that, it's interesting to note 2 points. First, Wells Fargo did fewer big layoffs than its comparison company, Bank of America. And second, upper management, including some of the senior Wells Fargo upper management, suffered more on a percentage basis than lower level workers in consolidation. Rigor in a good to great company applies first at the top, focused on those who held the largest burden of responsibility. To be rigorous in people's decisions means first becoming rigorous about top management people decisions. Indeed, I fear that people might use first who rigor as an excuse for mindly chopping out people who improve performance. It's hard to do so, but we've got to be rigorous. I can hear them say, and I cringe, for not only will a lot of hardworking good people get hurt in the process, but the evidence suggests that the tactics are contrary to producing sustained great results. The good to great companies rarely used headcount lopping as a tactic and almost never used it as a primary strategy. Even in the Wells Fargo case, the company used layoffs half as much as Bank of America during the transition era. 6 of the 11 good to great companies recorded 0 layoffs from 10 years before the breakthrough date all the way through 1998, and 4 others reported only 1 to 2 layoffs. In contrast, we found layoffs used 5 times more frequently in the comparison companies than in the good to great companies. Some of the comparison companies had almost a chronic addiction to layoffs and restructurings. It would be a mistake, a tragic mistake indeed, to think that the way you ignite a transition from good to great is by wantonly swinging the axe on vast numbers of hardworking people. Endless restructuring and mindless hacking were never part of the good to great model. Wow. How to be rigorous. We've extracted three practical disciplines from the research for being rigorous rather than ruthless. Practical discipline number 1, when in doubt, don't hire, keep looking. One of the most immutable laws of management physics is the Packard's law, so-called because we first learned it in a previous research project from David Packard, co-founder of the Hewlett-Packard Company, and it goes like this. No company can grow revenues consistently faster than its ability to get enough of the right people to implement that growth and still become the great company. If your growth rate in revenues consistently outpaces your growth rate in people, you simply will not, indeed cannot, build a great company. Those who build great companies understand that the ultimate throttle on growth for any great company is not markets or technology or competition or products. It is one thing above all others, the ability to get and keep enough of the right people. That's where it's at. That's where it's at. The management team at Circuit City instinctively understood Packard's law. Driving around Santa Barbara the day after Christmas a few years ago, I noticed something different about the Circuit City store. Other stores had signs and banners reaching out to customers, always the best prices, or great after holiday deals, or after Christmas selection, and so forth. But now Circuit City, it had a banner that read, always looking for great people. The sign reminded me of an interview with Walter Burkert, which was the vice president during the Good to Great years. When asked to name a few of the top factors that led to the transition from mediocrity to excellence, Burkert said, 1 would be people, 2 would be people, and 3 would be people, 4 would be people, and 5 would be people. A huge part of our transition can be attributed to our discipline in picking the right people. Burkert then recalled a conversation with CEO Alan Wurzel during a growth spurt at Circuit City. Alan, I'm really wearing down trying to find the exact right person to fill this position or this or that position. At what point do I compromise? Without hesitation, Alan said, you don't compromise. We find another way to get through until we find the right people. Come on. One of the key contrasts between Alan and Wurzel, Alan at Circuit City and Sydney at Silo, is that Wurzel spent the bulk of his time in the early years focused on getting the right people on the bus, whereas Cooper spent 80% of his time focusing on the right stores to buy. Wurzel's first goal was to build the best, most professional management team in the industry, and Cooper's first goal was to simply grow as fast as possible. Circuit City would put tremendous emphasis on getting the right people all up on down the line, from delivery drivers to vice presidents. Solo developed a reputation for not only being able to do the basics like making home deliveries without damaging the products, but according to Circuit City's Dan Rexner, we made the best home delivery drivers in the industry. We told them, you are the last contact the customer has with Circuit City. We are going to supply you with uniforms. We will require you that you shave, that you don't have BO. You're going to be professional people. The change in the way we handle customers when making a delivery was absolutely incredible. We would get thank you notes back on the courteous the drivers were, on how courteous the drivers were. 5 years into Wurzel tenure, Circuit City and Silo had essentially the business strategy, the same answers to the what questions. Yet Circuit City took off like a rocket, beating the general stock market 18.5 to 1 in the 15 years after its transition, while Silo bumped along until it was finally acquired by a foreign company. Same strategy, different people, different results. Strong. Practical discipline number 2. When you know you need to make a people act, when you know you need to make a people act, a people change act, when you know you need to make a people change act, the moment you feel the need to tightly manage someone, you've made a hiring mistake. Oof. The best people don't need to be managed. Guided, taught, led, yes, but not tightly managed. We've all experienced or observed the following scenario. We have a wrong person on the bus and we know it, yet we wait, we delay, we try alternatives, we give a third and a fourth chance. We hope that the situation will improve. We invest time in trying to properly manage the person. We build little systems to compensate for the shortcomings and so forth, but the situation doesn't improve. When we go home, we find our energy diverted by thinking or talking to our spouse about that person. Worse, all the time and energy we spend on the one person siphons energy away from developing and working with all the right people. We continue to stumble along until the person leaves on his own, to our great sense of relief. Or we finally act, and also to our great sense of relief. Meanwhile, our best people wonder, what took you so long? Letting the wrong people hang around is unfair to all the right people, as this inevitably find themselves compensating for the inadequacies of wrong people. And worse, It can drive away the best people. Strong performers are intrinsically motivated by performance. Strong performers are intrinsically motivated by performance. And when they see their efforts impeded by carrying extra weight, they eventually become frustrated. Waiting too long before acting is equally unfair to the people who need to get off the bus. For every minute you allow a person to continue holding a seat when you know that that person will not make it to the end, you're stealing a portion of their life, time that they can be spending, finding a better place where they can flourish. Oof. Indeed, if we're honest with ourselves, the reason we wait too long often has less to do with concern for the person and more to do with our own convenience. He's doing an okay job and it would be a huge hassle to replace him, so we avoid the issue, or we find the whole process of dealing with the issue to be stressful and distasteful. So to save ourselves stress and discomfort, we wait and wait and wait. Meanwhile, all the best people are wondering, when are they going to do something about this? How long is this going to go on? Using data from Moody's company information reports, we are able to examine the pattern of turnover in the top management levels. We found no difference in the amount of turnover within a period of time between the good to great companies and comparison companies, but we did find differences in the patterns of churn. The good to great companies showed the following bipolar pattern at the top management level. People either stayed on the bus for a long time or got off the bus in a hurry. In other words, the good to great companies did not churn more, they churned better. The good to great leaders did not pursue an expedient. Try a lot of people and keep who works model management. Instead, they adopted the following approach. Let's take the time to make rigorous A+ selections right up front. If we get it right, we'll do everything we can to try to keep them on board for a long time. And if we make a mistake, then we'll confront the facts so that we can get on with our work and they can get on with their lives. The good to great leaders, however, would not rush to judgment. Often they invested substantial efforts in determining whether they had someone in the wrong seat before concluding that they had the wrong person on the bus entirely. When Coleman Mockler became CEO of Gillette, he didn't go on a rampage, wantonly throwing people out of the windows of the bus, but instead he spent fully 55% of the time during his first 2 years in office jiggering around with the management team, changing or moving 38 of the top 50 people. Said Mockler, every minute devoted to putting the proper person in the proper slot is worth weeks of time later. Similarly, Alan Wurtzel of Circus City sent us a letter after reading an early draft of this chapter wherein he commented, "Your point about getting the right people on the bus as compared to other companies is dead on. There's one corollary that is also important. I spend a lot of time thinking and talking about who sits where on the bus. I call it putting square pegs in square holes and round pegs in round holes. Instead of firing honest and able people who are not performing well, it is important to try to move them once or even 2 or 3 times to other positions where they might blossom. It might take time to know for certain if someone is simply in the wrong seat or whether he or she needs to get off the bus altogether. Nonetheless, when the good to great leaders knew they had to make a people change, they would act." But how do you know when you know? 2 key questions can help. First, if it were a hiring decision, rather than should this person get off a bus decision, would you hire that person again? Second, If that person came to tell you that he or she is leaving to pursue an exciting new opportunity, how would you feel? Would you feel terribly disappointed or secretly relieved? Practical discipline number 3. Put your best people on your best opportunities, not your biggest problems. In the early 1960s, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris derived the vast majority of their revenues from the domestic arena. R.J. Reynolds' approach to international business was, if somebody out there in the world wants a camel, let them call us. Joe Coleman at Philip Morris had a different view. He identified international markets as the single best opportunity for long-term growth, and despite the fact that the company derived less than 1% of its revenues from overseas. Coleman puzzled over the best strategy for developing international operations and eventually came up with a brilliant answer. It was not a what answer, but a who. He pulled his number one executive, George Wiseman, off the primary domestic business and put him in charge of the international. At the time, international amounted to almost nothing. A tiny export department, a struggling investment in Venezuela, another in Australia, and a tiny operation in Canada. When Joe put George in charge of the international, a lot of people wondered what George had done wrong. Quipped one of Wiseman's colleagues, "I didn't know whether I was being thrown sideways, downstairs, or out the window," said Wiseman. "Here I was running 99% of the company, and the next day I'd be running 1% or less." Yet, as Forbes magazine observed 20 years later, Coleman's decision to move Wiseman to the smallest part of the business was a stroke of genius. Urbane and sophisticated, Wiseman was one of the perfect people to develop markets like Europe, and he built international into the largest and fastest growing part of the company. And in fact, under Wiseman's stewardship, Marlboro became the best-selling cigarettes in the world 3 years before it became number 1 in the United States. The RJR versus Philip Morris case illustrates a common pattern. The good to great companies made a habit of putting their best people on their best opportunities, not their biggest problems. The comparison companies had a penchant for doing just the opposite, failing to grasp the fact that managing your problems can only make you good, whereas building your opportunities is the only way to become great. There's an important corollary to this discipline. When you decide to sell off your problems, don't sell off your best people. This is one of those little secrets of change. If you create a place where the best people always have a seat on the bus, they're more likely to support changes in direction. For instance, when Kimberly-Clark sold all the mills, Darwin Smith made it very clear the company might be getting rid of the paper business, but it would keep its best people. Many of our people came up through the paper business. Then all of a sudden the crown jewels are being sold off and they're asking, what is my future? And Darwin would say, we need all the talented managers we can get. We keep them. Despite the fact that they had little or no consumer experience, Smith moved all the best people, the paper people, to the consumer business. We interviewed Dick, a senior executive who spent the majority of his career in the paper making division at Kimberly-Clark, the same division that sold off to create funds for the company's big move into consumer products. And he talked about with pride and excitement about the transformation of Kimberly-Clark and how it had the guts to sell the paper mills, how it had the foresight to exit the paper business and throw all the proceeds into the consumer business. And now it had taken on the Procter & Gamble. I never had an argument with our decision to dissolve the paper division of the company, he said. We did get rid of the paper mills at the time, and I was in absolute agreement of that. Stop and think about that for a moment. The right people want to be part of building something great. And Dick saw that Kimberly-Clark could become great by selling the part of the company where he had spent most of his working life. The Philip Morris and Kimberly-Clark case illustrates a final point about the right people. We notice a level 5 atmosphere at the top executive level of every good to great company, especially during the key transition years. Not that every executive on the team became a fully evolved level 5 leader to the same degree as Darwin Smith or Coleman Mockler, but each core member of the team transformed personal ambition for the company. This suggests that the team members had level 5 potential, or at least they were capable of operating in a manner consistent with the level 5 leadership style. You might be wondering what's the difference between a level 5 executive team member and just being a good soldier. A level 5 executive team member does not blindly acquiesce the authority and is a strong leader in his own right. So driven and talented that she built her arena into one of the best of the world. Yet each team member must also have the ability to meld that strength into doing whatever it takes to make the company great. And indeed, one of the most crucial elements in taking a company from good to great is somewhat paradoxical. You need executives on the right hand who argue and debate, and sometimes violently, in pursuit of the best answers, yet, on the other hand, who unify fully behind a decision, regardless of the parochial interests. An article on Philip Morris said the Coleman era, these guys never agreed on anything and they would argue about everything and they would kill each other and involve everyone, high and low, talented people. But when they make a decision, the decision would emerge. This made Philip Morris, no matter how much they argued, said Philip Morris, they were always in search of the best answer. In the end, everybody stood behind the decision. All of the debates were for the common good of the company, not their own interests. First two, great companies and a great life. Whenever I teach the good to great findings, someone almost always raises the issue of the personal cost in making a transition from good to great. And in other words, is it possible to build a great company and also build a great life? The answer is yes. The secret to doing so lies right in this chapter. I spent a few short days with senior Gillette executive and his wife at an executive conference in Hong Kong. During the course of our conversation, I asked them if they thought Coleman, the CEO, most responsible for Gillette's transition from good to great, had a great life. Coleman's life revolved around three great loves, they told me: his family, Harvard, and Gillette. Even during the darkest and most intense times of his takeover rises of the 1980s, and despite the increasingly global nature of Gillette's business, Mockler maintained a remarkable balance in his life. He did not significantly reduce the amount of time he spent with his family, rarely working evenings or weekends. He maintained his disciplined workship practices, and he continued his active work on governing boards on Harvard College. When I asked how Mockler accomplished all of this, the executive said, "Oh, it really wasn't that hard for him. He was so good at assembling the right people around him and putting the right people in the right slots that he just didn't need to be there all hours of the day and night." That was Coleman's whole secret to success and balance. The executive went on to explain that he was just as likely to meet Mockler in the hardware store as at the office. He really enjoyed puttering around the house, fixing things up. He always seemed to find time to relax that way. Then the executive's wife added, "When Coleman died and we all went to the funeral, I looked around and realized how much love was in the room. This was a man who spent nearly all his waking hours with people who loved him, who loved what they were doing, and who loved one another, at work, at home, in his charitable work, wherever." And the statement rang a bell for me. And there was something about the good to great executives that I couldn't quite describe, but that clearly set them apart. In wrapping up the interview with George Wiseman's of Philip Morris, I commented, "When you talk about your time at the company, it's as if you're describing a love affair." He chuckled and said, "Yes, Other than my marriage, it was the most passionate love affair of my life. I don't think many people would understand what I'm talking about, but I suspect my colleagues would. Wiseman and many of his executive colleagues kept offices of Philip Morris coming in on a regular basis, long after his retirement. A corridor at the Philip Morris World Headquarters is called the Hall of the Wizards of Was. It's the corridor where Wiseman, Coleman, Maxwell, and others continue to come to the office, in large part because they simply enjoy spending time together. Similarly, Dick of Kimberly-Clark said in his interview, "I never had anyone in Kimberly-Clark in all of my 41 years say anything unkind to me. I thank God the day I was hired because I've been associated with wonderful people, good people who respected and admired one another." Members of the good to great teams tended to become and remain friends for life. In many cases, they are still in close contact with each other, years or decades after working together. It was striking to hear them talk about the transition area, for no matter how dark the days or how big the tasks, these people had fun. They enjoyed each other's company and actually looked forward to meetings. A number of the executives characterized their years on the good to great teams as the high point of their lives. Their experiences went beyond just mutual respect, which they certainly had, to lasting commandership. Adherence to the idea of first to might be the closest link between a great company and a great life. For no matter what we achieve, if we don't spend the vast majority of our time with people we love and respect, we cannot possibly have a great life. But if we spend the majority of our time with people who we love and respect, people will really enjoy being on the bus and who will never disappoint us. Then we will almost certainly have a great life, no matter where the bus goes. The people we interviewed from the good to great companies clearly loved what they did, largely because they loved who they did it with. Ooh, dang. This chapter has all the feels in the world. I really enjoyed this chapter. I mean, it has everything. This whole entire book is like orange. You know what I'm saying? I really enjoyed this so much. And I love how they connected the love aspect at the end, you know? And I really understand, I really connect with the ruthless and I really connect with the rigorous. And I feel like at one point in my career, a couple of years ago, we were very ruthless and it never felt right. And now that we're more learning, you know, we're still learning how to be rigorous, it has dramatically shifted our quality of life outside of our business. So I so vibe with that. So vibe with that. And I hope you enjoyed this chapter as much as I did. I wish you the very best. And I'll see you in the next Read With Me session where we dig deeper into what we're going to be talking about in chapter 4. And that is confronting the brutal facts, yet never losing faith. I'll see you in the next Read With Me session. Bye.